And I know the last session is always a tough session. That's the sessions they always give me because I'm the designated hitter, okay? That means that two things. I better be good and I better be quick, okay? First, let me have you do this. Put one hand, right hand in front of you, your left hand in front of you, and pat yourselves on the back, okay, for showing up and participating. My name is Dr. Eric Gravenberg. I'm an ICB consultant. I'm also president, CEO of the Gravenberg Group. We do a lot in terms of enrollment management, leadership development, team building, and executive coaching. Work with several different institutions in terms of HBCUs. I used to work at Howard University for a few years and did some work with Noel Levitz. Did a lot of work with Dr. Lomax at Dillard. Really enjoyed that assignment. Did some work at Central State and other institutions. Done a lot of training in terms of HBCUs and non-HBCU institutions. I'm a former college president, student affairs by training. So that's just a shorthand version. My mother always told me to make sure people knew who you were. A couple of caveats. One, you will hear a lot of my grandfather in my presentation. And one of the things my grandfather told me when I was 5 years old, and some folks have heard this already, he sat me on his knee and he said, "Son, I'm going to tell you something you already know." And I said, "Well, why are you telling me, Grandfather?" He said, "Because you need to hear it again." So part of this you may have already heard, so I want to make sure that I respect your intellect, first of all. This has been a great conference. I want to thank the folks who have put that on. You know, Darrell Ann in particular, we facilitated a session in terms of the think tank, and Darrell Ann, thank you for that. Very much appreciated. Dr. Bridges, appreciate your leadership in this regard, sitting in on the session, giving us the glowing remarks to kind of kick it off, really set the tone. So I want to make sure I appreciate and thank you publicly for your role and your leadership. Very much appreciated. So we had put together a think tank, and a think tank to really begin to look at some of the key issues facing all of us. Why did we do that? Because we know we live in a world that is far too complex for any individual to really understand. Things are moving so rapidly. It seems like as long as I can remember working in institutions, we've always gone through change. And my staff would ask me, when are we going to stop changing? Okay? You can't stop change, but you can also prepare for change. We realize also that experience is depreciating at an accelerating rate. What we thought we knew before, we don't know anymore. And it really requires a collective effort of all of us. You've heard all the speakers talk about the changing dynamics, the shrinking pool of students, the high demand in terms of resource allocation, the challenges we face on the campus, not to mention the political context in which we find ourselves nationally with folks that don't necessarily like institutions like ours. We've been there before. So what we really need to talk about is how do we make sure that even though we don't have those resources, sometimes they're out of our control, what do we need to do as institutions collectively to collaborate? And I might say that collaboration is really the byproduct of three things: communication, cooperation, and coordination. We've talked a lot about that. If you don't have those three things, you can't collaborate. They have to be in unison and aligned. And that competition for our students is fiercer than it's ever been before. So we've got to do something a little bit differently. And so when the think tank was designed to really look at, we got to change, we got to have new rules and new behavior. We got to have new ways of thinking and doing. That what we've done in the past, old practices may or may not work. That we keep adapting, but adaptive challenges are not immune to the technical solutions. So we got to do more than just try to respond to everything in terms of a technical way. And technology may be the force multiplier, but it's not the panacea. Okay? We got to realize that. Technology can't solve everything. Now, my kids think it can solve everything, okay? And they take great delight when some of us are not as proficient as they are, okay? But it's that human interaction is where we have the edge and that we have to restore. So the think tank said, you know, our current approach is to think outside the box. But that's old school. We really need to think like there's no box. Because, that frees us. It frees us to begin to look at other things rather than the same old things. I wanted to give you the role of the definition of the think tank. It's a group of dedicated individuals who think critically, who think without bias. That means for the good of all of us, in such a way to address the systemic issues or problems by creating new solutions that are counterintuitive to conventional wisdom. And at this point, I'd like for those members who are involved in the think tank to stand up because they need to be recognized. So if they could stand, please, the ones that are still here. I'd like for you to give them a round of applause. There were several other college presidents who were with us as well. So we had about 8 individuals. And so what they did was we had a session that we facilitated that came up and looked at the challenges, the top 3 challenges, and what were some of the solutions to those challenges. So I want to share with you some of their collective work. No surprise to anybody, finance and resource development is a key challenge. We have to go beyond our current thinking of moving beyond just the grants and contributions. We need to think about how do we grow those endowments as an investment for sustainability. And I know when you get on your campuses, you have this challenge with sometimes institutional leaders don't see that view. Or they tell you, well, let's wait, because I need these monies to pay for something else right now. I got a cash flow issue. That's short-term thinking. We also know that we need to become more entrepreneurial. I was really glad to hear this in our session. We've got to find some different revenue streams. At the end of my presentation, I'm going to give you a reading list, and one of the books I recommend that you read is called End of Jobs. Not only is our market share sinking and slipping away from us, jobs are changing too. There are fewer jobs, particularly if you don't have the skill set, because of competition, because of technology, and there are just fewer jobs that we're almost over-credentialing people. So many people are really looking at entrepreneurial activities, either for the institution to develop some new revenue and or to train our students to become at least entrepreneurial thinking. Really important. Enrollment management. Now, some of us are doing this right now, kind of looking at it from a data-centric approach of what do we need to know and when do we need to know it. But we also know that there's a lot of programs that we have that don't graduate folks. Bill Whelan talked about that. You know those programs on your campus. When I go to the campus and I do an assessment and find out we have a French program, we had the French program for the last 15 years and we only graduated 3 students. But we don't want to move the professor out because he's such a nice guy. Okay? Come on. 2 things you can do when I'm talking. You can say amen or have mercy. Okay? Because you know it's true. It's not to denigrate the individual, but it's to look at some tough decisions we're going to have to make. Okay? Why French and not Spanish or Chinese? You hear what I'm saying? How are we preparing people for the global marketplace? Okay? So those are some critical decisions that we have to make. And I've been a faculty member and I understand. You know, they're a very protective group and I appreciate what they do. They're the custodians of the values of our institutions. But at the same time, we're going to have to make some real tough decisions. Our product, what can we create to provide what is needed to be in a competitive marketplace? Think about that. My grandfather told me, if you're not creating anything, you're dead. If you're not creating anything, you're dead. It's nothing new. You're predictable. You're not responding to the marketplace. Now, all of this you know, but this is some of the recommendations that we came up with in the think tank. We know this because when we take a look at students are diverse learners now. They got more options. They got Coursera, they got MIT, they got Harvard, they got Phoenix, they got all of those institutions. And we won't talk about, whether the outcomes are the same, but those are the people that we're in competition with, that we're not emphasizing enough of our own strengths. Education is decentralized, distributed. You can learn when you want to, okay? So those are our aspects of competition. I talked about job turn, the new jobs of the future. These are all things that force us to look differently. We spend a lot of time talking about governance and leadership. I got to get an amen on this, okay? Come on. Okay, and have mercy. We talked about the role of boards. We talked about new presidents, the continuity of leadership. Sometimes our president's only being there for a short period of time for a lot of reasons. Some good. Some, they're so good they get picked up and moved on. Okay, that happens. Some that need to go that don't go. Okay? And some of that may be institutional, and some of it may be cultural, but other parts of it in terms of how we prepare them. So one of the recommendations that the think tank came up with was to have a senior leadership institute to create visionary and courageous leaders to build the organizational continuity and stability. Identify new talent, orienting them. Now, I understand that UNCF used to do this a long time ago, convene all the presidents, vice presidents, and have some conversation about, what to expect, and also provide it as a support group. But we also have to create an ethos of commitment that they're going to stay at those institutions. And sometimes you've got to do some other things in terms of providing them the compensation, the rewards, and incentives. Because we all know that, an institution can thrive or die based upon its leadership. And so if you don't have the consistent, stable leadership, we know what happens. We get in the press, we've got a new president again. Why did the last president leave? You whip the crowd up to a frenzy, get everybody involved, people get ready to move, and then all of a sudden the president's gone, or the vice president's gone, okay? You've been there before. So we need something to make sure that we've got consistent, stable leadership, and that was one of the key recommendations. The second one I've already talked about, how do you keep them there? And you don't always keep people there with money. People come to HBCUs primarily because of the commitment to the institution and to the cause. Keeping them there is the challenge. That's the challenge. And that's the ones that we're going to have to address. And that's what the think tank came up with. And we also need to make sure that when you get back home, it's not just the presidents, but the kind of staff development, professional training for faculty and staff is critical. We heard Bell Whelan talk about that's the first thing in the budget to go. Okay? But who do we turn to immediately when we want some change? We go back to the staff, right? And they look at us, and here's what happened. I was at an institution, and we're putting in a change management process. And one of the key aspects was customer service, or the lack thereof, okay? And so a person came to me and said, Dr. Gravenberg, I want to provide good customer service, but you're not providing me with the resources, the tools, okay? I need the tools to be effective. I got the heart, but you got to give me the tools. So those things we have to pay attention to. It's not enough just to have the training, make everybody feel good, You really got to move more progressively and much more assertively in terms of providing the tools and resources for folks. And then we talked a lot about board leadership development. We all know sometimes that some board members micromanage, either because they don't understand the role or that's what they think they need to do. But that's an accreditation issue, a serious one. I've had board members call me and complain about a faculty member, say I should fire the faculty member, okay? I've had that happen constantly. Why did I admit so-and-so student? You know he's a criminal. I'm serious. Micromanaging is, and I had to politely tell the board member, look, you hired me as the CEO. Let me do my job. And you're venturing into areas in terms of accreditation to get the institution in trouble, okay? She didn't take too kindly to it. But I had to remind her, well, I'm trying to protect you and the institution, okay? Redefining the leadership paradigm. People think they can stop change. They can slow it down, okay? Close their eye to it. Can't happen. A lot of times, and I'm going to use Dr. Lomax as an example here. When I came in, he came in to ask me to do some work, mainly to help market the institution, try to bring students from California to Dillard, and then to do some other kinds of team building. And one of the things I said, well, let's find out what people are doing now. We found out what people are doing. So I said, one of the things that your leaders need to do is stop doing some things. Stop doing some things that were going to impede the progress of students. So we had to look at the institutional practices of why we were doing and start from there rather than keep adding on things that we should be doing. Let's eliminate some things that were roadblocks. I do a lot of walking around institutions, and when I'm a consultant, people don't know who I am, and I kind of like it that way because I can observe. And several institutions, I'll walk around and I'll just observe how students are treated, how faculty and staff feel about being on the campus. And I can tell you some great success stories and some stories where people need to work on some things. But I always watch the students and how they're treated. So from a data perspective is making sure that we're always paying attention to the needs of the students from their point of view. From their point of view, which leads me to my second lesson from my grandfather. The last one to see the water is the fish. We get so immersed in the water that we miss the student's perspective and forget to ask them how that experience is for them. And they will tell you. Experience is not a proxy. The think tank spent a lot of energy talking about what else do we need to bring to the table, who else do we need to consult, how do we get these things implemented, how do we sustain change on our campuses. Because you know your campus is better than anybody. You know the folks who are obstacles to progress. You know the policies and procedures that are obstacles to progress. When I was at one institution, I'm not going to name it, but I was trying to make sure that students got through the registration process, okay? And I was told by the registrar, we can't do that. I said, well, why not? And I said, well, let me see the policy. She said, well, we have an unwritten policy. I said, what the hell is an unwritten policy? Okay, what is that? That's something you made up for your convenience, right? So, I said, well, if you can't show it to me in writing, then it doesn't exist. And so we're going to have to change some things. Now, because she reported to me, I didn't want to create an enemy. I've been a registrar. I know what kind of damage they can do, right? So I had to sit her down and tell her, what's your fear? What are you afraid of? Okay? And the fear was she didn't have the bandwidth, the capacity to handle the increased enrollment that I was projecting. Okay? She didn't know how to articulate it. And it wasn't necessarily that I need more staff. She wasn't even brought into the picture of the conversation of discussions. See? So it was as simple as that, paying attention to the little things. Okay? Got to cultivate new skills. And one of the things that we talk about, we have events like this. Even though 60% or 70% of what you already know, you've heard, that's important because you need validation. It's that 10 or 15% where innovation occurs. You might hear something new. When we were in our session yesterday and we did the case study, one of the things that you said was so profound. We got to think differently. We got to think differently, okay? And if you're old school and we've been in the business a long time, first of all, you're tired, okay? Right? Y'all tired, right? You tired, amen. And, it's like, all right, what now, doc? Okay, what else do I got to do? But if not us, who? Okay? Our students are dependent on us. They don't care how tired, how old we are. We have to learn to anticipate by data-driven curiosity. The key drivers of change, let me continue with some of the other recommendations. Brand identity, just perception about we're less than, okay? We're not. We heard from the panel of presidents today, that was the soundtrack for our public relations. That was so powerful. It gave me a chill in terms of just the ethos that we have. Why we just sit back and don't pontificate that surprises me, okay? Nobody's tougher than us. So when we do get some negative publicity, we just keep churning out all the positive stuff. Okay, we begin to change that people's perception. I had a new chancellor come in. I had applied for a job as a president at an institution where the chancellor was. The outgoing chancellor didn't appoint me because he wanted to make sure that the new chancellor had that opportunity, which was fine. which is what I advise presidents all the time, new person come in, pick your own person. 6 months later, he says, let's go to lunch. He's already kind of checked me out. And he says, I didn't pick you as president for this institution because I want to bring in my own person. And I had heard from the former chancellor that you didn't follow up on stuff. Okay, so the first reaction, I'm from the inner city, and I'm reaching in my pocket, but I didn't. I said, well, you know what, Chancellor, I guess I need to work harder at changing that perception, okay? And he was kind of taken aback by that. I could have went off. So he needed to get data from other people. I didn't have to give it to him. I knew my rep, okay? Whatever me and the former chancellor had, that was issues between him and I. That was gone. So creating that perception, you got to work at it. You can't get mad about it. You got to work at it, emphasize what you can do. And that's what we have to do. Social media, we need to be really intelligent about that. I wouldn't advise all social media. I just got through advising an institution on the best use of social media. Some of us are not on Twitter and Facebook, don't want to be on that, don't care about it. Okay? Know your population first. That's real important, because if you don't, they'll out-finesse you on social media. Really important. Dr. Jackson talked about inculcating a pride in our institutions by investing in our people first. If we don't take care of the pride of the institution and people feeling good about being there, that negative stuff is going to keep bouncing back, no matter how much PR we put out. So we got to take care of home first. Here's the next recommendation. It was alluded to in Bell Whelans and picked up on by the think tank. We need to create a data consortium of all the HBCUs. And we need to look at it from practicing honest, unselfish, collective leadership. How do we share data in a way that makes sense? It doesn't intimidate folks, like you're trying to steal my students, okay? But how do we use data to make it more powerful? Because if you look at this whole concept of big data, you can get intimidated. But how do we use the resources that we have to make that happen? We didn't have the next step recommendations. We ran out of time, but this is a recommendation that we were thinking about real deeply. And we know that UNCF has thought about this as well. How do we leverage it more collectively for all of you? Because I've been in institutions where there was not just one researcher, there was a half a researcher, okay? And I've been at institutions where they're trying to save money, so they cut the researcher, and guess who was our next visitor? The Accreditation Commission, okay? So how do we protect each other by that kind of consortium and thinking? And the last one was to continue the think tank. And maybe this sounds like a little self-serving, but I would really we asked the members of the think tank that they want to continue their work, and they said yes, because we continue to need to be at the forefront of change and innovation, and they can provide, I think, some guidance to the rest of us. And we can rotate that membership in and out because all of you have that capacity. All of you have that capacity in terms of being, let's say faculty or presenters at an HBCU Leadership Development Training Institute, okay? And I'm taking the model that you gave us this in terms of the coaching, okay, which was so powerful. So that's something that we need to be thinking about. How the expertise we have, how can that be shared so we provide that historical continuity and that stability of leadership? So here are some of the fundamental questions when you talk about creating a new future. Beware of the opportunities and the challenges of big data, okay? Know what you're talking about, know what you're looking at. So we had great examples in terms of how to ask the deeper questions. And as a trained ethnographer, I always look at the qualitative questions as well. What's below the surface? How do people make meaning of that? Why are they doing those kinds of things? On the second bullet, the one that's always struck me is not only how is it organized and how does it inform our practice, but who decides? Who in the institution decides what data to look at? And then how it's not only collected but analyzed, and then how it informs the decisions. How do we leverage technology, artificial intelligence, and the wave of the Internet of Things? I mean, our world is changing so fast that sometimes it's going to force you to go into early retirement, okay? Because you can't keep up. But when you see a lot of young folks walk through our doors who want to shadow us, you better hook on to them, okay? Because they're our next level for succession planning. And the most crucial is how do HBCUs organize themselves as a consortium for collective action? We gave you some examples. There's some great things going on that UNCF is doing right now, and I know they're going to continue those. But that's the perennial challenge. As our president panel talked about, time's running out. And if folks don't collaborate in ways that are much more efficient and have hard critical looks at their mission, what they're all about, and maybe change that focus, then they will be out of business. Just the way of the world. We have to make sure that when you talk about innovation, is it a new product or practice, or is it just kind of reinforcing some of the things you've done before? Be real careful about how you use innovation, because people think that innovation means you're going to do something that's totally new. You may just want to take something that's already existent and bite it off in small steps, okay? So be careful about that, okay? Don't rush to innovation because you know you need to change. It may be just reinventing existing practice. This is the definition, and you'll have access to this slide. We're going to get them to you. And we tried to put them to you not only in terms of the recommendations of the think tank, but also some practical things that you can take back. Here's what we see as the phases of innovation: planning, implementing, and sustaining. Anticipation is the frame that we talk about where you want to exceed the expectations of your stakeholders. That's where you're going to spend all your time in terms of looking at data and asking those tough questions. That data should inform your implementation plan. And then the toughest part is going to be sustaining it. How do you get it implemented? How do you sustain it? You can have the vision. If you don't have the vision, it's going nowhere. And there are other kinds of steps in that process that are really critical. So here's how you operationalize it. So let's say part of the plan is the identification of critical issues, the themes of change, whatever that is on your campus. Those task forces can kind of assess and reevaluate where you need to be in as an institution. So you've got institutional buy-in. So the task forces then now you focus on pushing those recommendations to a work group who will analyze policies, procedures, and practices. So everything is driving everything down. But the culture of trust and the culture of quality service, the sustaining piece, is a crucial one. How do you create that quality environment? How do you create that element of trust? Trust is crucial. If you don't have trust, ain't nothing moving, okay? Here's the reading list, and this is near the end of my presentation. There's a great book called The Immunity to Change. I love that. It describes a lot of institutions that I've worked in and a lot of individuals that I've worked with. And I used to get mad at folks because they didn't want to change. But sometimes from a biological perspective, people will just shut down because change is really hard on them. So there's a biological aspect to this as well, that the organism of the organization protects itself. And you have to know how it does that in such a way that it begins to kind of break it down and decode it. And you're going to get all of these. The next one is drive. What motivates us? Okay? What motivates individuals to do certain kinds of things that they do? What's the difference between inspiration and motivation? I never motivated my staff. My job was to inspire them so that they become motivated. And it took me a long time to get to that. Okay? The Speed of Trust, I've already mentioned that. It's a great book. Talks about the speed of trust and trust as a fiscal factor. That when you don't have trust, it costs you money. And when you do, it increases your capacity to bring in more money. And then the last one, The End of Jobs, great book. There are a couple other books that we're going to trade off on that I need to get from you as well. But that one really talks about just the jobs disappearing and where are those jobs. It makes a case for entrepreneurship, so I want to kind of disclaimer up front, but it really gives, I think, a good historical analysis in terms of just the economies that we've lived in and how things are shifting. I hope this will be good tools for you when you take it back to the campus. Again, I want to thank the think tank members for really coming up with some very provocative ideas, and I'd ask them to comment if I've left out anything. But again, thank you for your time. Thank you.